Hello and welcome. This is the big question we all ask. Will India become a superpower? Some of us believe that India is already a superpower. Well, here's someone who's going to say no and going to explain why. I'm joined by Ashley J Tellis, Senior Associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, specializing in international security, defense and Asian strategic issues. Ashley, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Pleasure.
And you've also been in India from and working with the State Department and I guess seen both sides of the equation. So tell us, are we deluding ourselves into thinking that we're already there?
I think yes. If one makes the argument that India is already there, I think that would be a hard case to convince anyone outside of India that that's the case.
Right.
But I think there's universal consensus that India has the potential to be there. But the critical variable is whether it makes the right policy choices in the next several years.
Right.
I think there was a turn for the better after 1991. In fact, I think there was a turn for the better going back 1980. But that transformation seems to have slowed down in unfortunate ways in the last several years.
So you're obviously linking it to economic progress and the opening up of the economy.
Very much so. Very much so. Because if you look at all the variables where India has succeeded, right? India's democracy, I think, is still in remarkably good shape, even though there is constant complaint about its anarchic character. But all the same, it's a functioning democracy, which is wonderful. India has a very cosmopolitan national ethos, which is wonderful because it's really what makes it quite unique, in countries of the third world, where the particularisms are all subordinated to this identity creation of being Indian, which is a great achievement. But the area where it has faltered is in how it manages the productive side of the country.
Right.
And I think this goes back to decisions made at independence, which the current government is finding hard to correct. But to my mind, that's where India will either stand or fall with respect to its great power ambitions.
Can you illustrate that?
In the current international system, power ultimately comes out of a material base. You don't have to be a Marxist to believe this. I mean, even if you're not a Marxist, everyone knows that the larger and more productive your economy, the more innovative your economy, the more resourceful your labor force, the more powerful the country becomes. And so the question that Indians have to ask themselves is, what is preventing a country that is otherwise so resourceful, and that resourcefulness can be seen in so many diverse areas of human endeavor? Why is it not delivering according to its potential? Now, the standard argument I get is, you've got to look at how far India has come. There's no doubt. India has come a long way. But when you compare India to the peers that it had in the 1960s, which are the smaller East Asian states, India has actually not done as well as it should have.
Or China, which is the classic comparison and example. Yeah.
Correct. But even if you take democratic societies, like so if you take, say, Japan, or if you take the smaller Southeast Asian states where you had kind of more contested political systems, they have still done much better than India has.
So, and when you say better, you mean economic and social indicators?
Absolutely.
The lot of the people?
Absolutely. I mean, there is a very simple test. It's an imperfect test, but it's a good test. And that is per capita income growth. If you look at per capita income growth in India compared to its Asian peers, I think India has not done as well as it should have. Okay. And the same is true when you compare it with China.
And size notwithstanding.
And size notwithstanding. And the important point, though, is that there was nothing that condemned India to suboptimal performance except the choices it made.
Okay. So the critics would argue that India has also achieved some progress as a soft power. They would also argue that if you were to look at the relative achievements in social indicators, relative, right, there is something to talk about, and the economy and economic progress or GDP growth is not necessarily the only indicator.
I think that's an overstated argument. There are very few countries in the world that have managed to sustain soft power outside of greater achievements in economic performance. So if you imagine that soft power is going to survive outside of a general improvement in productive potential, it's not going to be so. So yes, India has a lot to offer to the world, but if it can, in tandem, keep expanding its material base, that soft power will become all the more attractive. And I think that's the attention India has to go back to paying to.
Right. So let me ask you the same question or the set of questions from an individual's point of view, right? So this is the state and the sovereign, and the
Yes.
sovereign not taking the right decisions at the right time
Yes.
or the choices.
Yes.
How does an individual look at this, or how should an individual look at this, right? We have half this country is below 25 years.
Yes.
So how should they be viewing this?
Well, I think most Indians are making rational choices in the concrete circumstances of their lives, right? The problem is not the individual choice. The problem is the constraints that limit their choices. So, for example, let's talk of the 250 million young Indians who will be, driving this nation over the next 2 decades. These are individuals who are struggling to become productive members of this economy.
Right.
They don't have the opportunities with respect to education, with respect to skills, with respect to building up their own human capital. Not because they don't desire that, but because simply there are supply constraints. There are not enough good schools, there are not enough good programs that can, empower them. Now, this is where state choices, that is, state decisions with respect to the opportunities offered to them, will really make the difference to whether they become productive or whether they become disgruntled and ultimately, frustrated members of society. So when it comes to the individual at the micro level, Indians are behaving just as rational as any one of their peers in any one of the advanced societies. So what accounts for the difference? What accounts for the difference are the constraints under which they operate. So if India is to move forward, you need to really look again at those constraints and find ways of eradicating them.
Right. So the government in its present form has chosen to help every citizen or as many citizens as possible through a regime of subsidies and benefits and so on and so forth. Now, does that in some ways contrast with, let's say, other superpowers who perhaps empowered their citizens more and given them the tools? And I'd really like to hear your thoughts.
I think this is you've put your finger on the heart of the question. There are two ways to do this. One is to create a society which is grounded in a theory of entitlements. Another way to do it is to create a society where you do not provide entitlements, but you invest in human capital so that these individuals can go out then and produce their own entitlements. And I think India, in choosing the so-called rights-based approach, is actually doing itself harm, because the right-based approach has a giant unspoken premise for success. And that is, this society will be able to come up with the resources necessary to make the application of these rights practicable. There is no way in which you can square the circle. That is, it will take a long time before individuals who survive because of entitlements are productive enough to generate the surpluses that permit this trail of entitlements to be sustained. There's no way to do that.
Right. So you're looking at, so you're not saying it's just a supply problem, that even if there was sufficient economic growth and half the economy was taking care of the other half,
yes,
it's about the damage that we're doing to this half.
Absolutely. Because there are two issues involved, right? As you point out, there is a supply issue and whether you're contributing to supply, but there's also a responsibility issue. Any state that ends up being paternalistic, that is, it takes away responsibility from the individual for betterment, I think will not do as well as a peer state that invests in responsibility rather than entitlement. And I think this is where I think India needs to revisit the model that it has chosen to operate on.
And if I were to now, this could be an aberration of a few years, though in some would argue much longer. If you were to link it back now to the question that we started with, is India ready to be a superpower? And I know you're saying not yet. How would you sum this argument up?
Well, I would sum the argument in terms of pay attention to the investments that you're making. If you're making investments in an entitlement state, you will simply not be able to generate the growth that expands your material base. And if you cannot expand your material base, you will never reach your ambitions to be a power of consequence. And so there is a full circle in some sense that you come to. And my view is that I hope India will revisit this, because I think the present course is not particularly sustainable. Now, if you tell me that the next dispensation decides to address the supply side very, very resolutely by getting the state out of all the unproductive economic adventures, opens room for greater private sector involvement, growth begins to really move upwards, then we can look at the question of the model being sustainable. That is, can that better half look after the less privileged half, right? But then the question of responsibility still remains. That is, are you creating now a parasitical class that will continue to get used to these new entitlements and choose to kind of become dependent on those? And we have an analogous problem in our own society in the United States, and this was the great rebellion against the welfare state that occurred in the 90s. These are issues that Indian policymakers will have to struggle with, I think, for quite some time to come.
And perhaps they're not struggling sufficiently at this point in time.
Yes.
Or not even facing it.
Yes, yes. And what troubles me about is that many of the decisions that were made in this regard were made for what were short-term political gains, as opposed to a larger vision of getting India to where it ought to be.
Right.
Because the short-term political gains are so attractive, right? If you can lock in a certain vote bank, or if you can tie up a constituency that owes you, it's a trading of resources for votes, right? If that's the rationale which has justified these programs, then I think it is an opportunity lost.
So actually, let me ask you the last question. You don't live here in this country anymore, but you visit, and you've grown up in Bombay, and you're a Bombay boy to that extent. What's your? Do you have a dream? I mean, not a grandiose one, but a dream or a pleasant vision for life around here, and what you would like to see this?
Well, I'm extremely bullish on India. I mean, even in the midst of the last 4 years, when the shine that India had has kind of rubbed off, I have always said, you want to distinguish between a trend and you want to pay attention to what are essentially short-term perturbations. I think what has happened in the last few years is a short-term perturbation, because the trend lines are all very positive. So the question for me is, can we mitigate the damages caused by policy perturbations that take us further away from that trend? And I think this is where the last few years have been somewhat unkind to India. But India is a self-correcting society, as all democracies are. And I think sooner or later, it will go back to doing what is right by itself. And if it does what is right by itself, it will end up doing what is right for the world.
Right, and that's a good note to end on. Thank you so much for speaking with us, Ashley.
Not at all, pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.